So for this episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt, I did things a little bit different. I teamed up with another maker and another YouTuber to bring you a virtual tour of her quilts. But first, before we get started on this, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance, and I'm so happy you're here, and I can't wait to share this really cool quilt with you. So Andi from True Blue Quilts contacted me and asked me to look at one of her quilts and to discuss it and then have a crossover event, sort of, where I talk about this quilt and she does a tutorial on the border block. So definitely check out her channel for her border block tutorial where she'll show you how to make this really cool star block. So let's take a look at Andi's family quilt, and instead of reviewing the lessons at the end, I'm just going to put them as pop-ups on the screen as I talk about them. So let's get started taking a look at that.
The story of this quilt is my mom's family grew up in Minnesota, and her uncle actually, this was his quilt. His mother and grandma, generations in my family made these blocks and then put them away. And when my mom started quilting, her uncle, they were corresponding back and forth, and he sent her all the quilt blocks and said, hey, my mom never finished my quilt. Will you do that for me? So she had all these blocks from the 1940s. And the challenge then was, okay, what do I do with it? How do you take pieces of an old quilt and preserve the essence, the idea behind it and the sentiment? And I thought she did a fabulous job. So I do want to read the label because she did a very good job of documenting. She took pictures. This is the actual envelope that the patterns came in because it was kind of a mail order thing. So the stamp there is 1.5 cents. So a penny and a half is how much that letter cost. And it was the American Home Patterns. She has a picture of the cover there too. And she says, some quilts take longer to finish than others. The American History quilt blocks were embroidered by Hannah Bartlett in 1932 for her grandson, Merritt Bartlett. The blocks were not assembled until 2013 by Merritt's niece and Hannah's great-granddaughter, Mary. That's my mother. She found them in an old Dayton's department store box. Bessie Bartlett, Merritt's mother and an avid quilter, probably stored them in that treasured box until she could get around to completing the project. Mary finished the quilting in November 2014. Just 82 years after Merritt was born.
Hey, it got done, right?
Yeah, exactly. Finished eventually. So these are all blue work embroidery, and it's so much fun to look at the different scenes of, this one shows some of our, early American colonial scenes and meeting the Native Americans for the first time and moving west, and even some of, the wagon train. The Capitol building is down here.
Oh my goodness, look at that red work, or blue work rather.
Yeah, it's a similar concept, but it just is fabulous history to have there. So she, obviously had to bring in the modern fabrics and decided to just do plain sashing around the squares there and then add the star block with scrappy red, white, and blue to keep the patriotic feeling of that.
I love it. Traditionally they don't have sashing, the blue works and red works are right just butted up against each other. So I think that that's a huge thing that you can learn from this, is to maybe not stick with tradition and bring modern to the old. The blocks were preserved because they were in an envelope. I mean, thank goodness that, they look like they're in beautiful condition.
Yeah, there's just like 1 or 2 little age spots on it, but nothing terrible. And I haven't even taken the time yet to try to clean it up any. So yes, they were well preserved, and we're keeping the quilt out of the sun. And I would like to display it, but I definitely don't want it, on the bed where I have animals jumping up and down. So
yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, just with the threads too. They could catch on a nail and, one of the toenails and stuff, and you could pull a lot of it out. How were the backs? Did she say anything about the backs of the blocks, like how they were knotted and stuff? Were they well done?
I don't recall her studying them to that effect, but
yeah, they're really pretty.
Oops, and I'm finding loose threads even here. You don't see any of the work carried through. So they did a really good job of, however, securing those ends and stuff. We decided that we'd go ahead and stitch over the embroidery. So there's a basic star and then a little bit of echoing around the different elements of the design. So the star goes around the center and then is echoed out, and that kind of carries the traditional feel of quilting. But then if there's, certain elements that extend beyond the star, those are echoed to keep those shapes as well.
I love that. It's probably a good idea that it was a machine quilted, right?
Machine quilted, yeah. So
that's probably the best too, because you're not handling those blocks so much, not as much as you would like hand quilting. So I think the big lesson you could pull from this is, bringing those modern elements to preserve them, the blocks, because by machine quilting it, and by machine quilting over the design, you're actually securing those threads down so they don't come undone anymore, or not that they did, but if they were to come out, you'd have that extra security of quilting over it. Right. So I think it's incredible. I mean, I love that it's the old versus the new, and it's that juxtaposition of the two, and you see that really well. And I also love that your mom didn't try to hide the fact that she was bringing new in with the old. I think a lot of times when we use these antique blocks, we try to keep it authentic to the time, and why? Why would we want to do that? I mean, why hide the fact that you're actually bringing it to a modern part of history and saving?
I think it's also interesting that the original fabric is actually a nice bright white, and the modern muslin that she used is the fabric that looks a little more antique.
Isn't that awesome? That's so funny. We try so hard to make some of these they have all those reproduction fabrics and stuff, and it's so funny when you compare them to the real thing, and you're like, well, the real thing looks a lot better than the reproduction. They could have done a better job with our technology and getting it a little bit better, crisper, so it's so funny. Now, have you washed it at all?
No, this is just the way it was after the quilting was done. Like I said, I'd like to display it more. I haven't taken that time, busy with other projects. And so it tends to be stored in a closet, and then I'll, bring it out when I meet people that might have an interest in it. So it does get aired out, because it would be a shame to, get those crease lines and damage certain parts with it always being folded up. So
I think that's important to remember too, with the middle of it, that, it is very old. The middle is very old. So I think when you do add the new and old elements, you almost have to keep, and I'm glad she labeled it, for future generations, but you have to keep it in mind that they are fabrics. The middle probably eventually someday might break down quicker than the outside. But I think stabilizing it with the machine quilting was genius, because you have to do something to preserve those blocks. And I think our first tendency would be to do traditional. And I think that would have done more harm personally. And again, this is my opinion, I think it would have done more harm than good, doing
and
that.
Hopefully it will last, because it's not like we're trying to preserve 80-year-old batting, right. At least the batting is fresh and everything. So yeah, we did choose obviously really modern fabrics. Didn't try to go the reproduction route in the border, just grabbed some scrappy red, white, and blue there to enhance that. And then left the sashing here with the blue to give that feel of blue work, and then just these little squares are the red and blue stripe that you see in the corner.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's, I love the way it's framed. I think that I think if you would have done wider sashing and quarter stones, it wouldn't have the impact that it has, because it looks like it's a window pane almost in a way, you know, or it just has it really well framed. And then before your mom went to the border design, she even framed that, you know, which I think was really smart to do because it highlights it.
There's almost some like a reddish tone along some of the machine quilting lines. So I'm wondering if that being folded against this red fabric.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That might pick up other colors.
Right.
You know, the way you fold it, if you fold it against modern fabrics.
Yeah, it's probably worth a trip to the store to get some of that archival tissue paper.
Right. Just to make sure if you're folding it up.
Yeah. In that, yeah, that's a good idea.
And even
because we definitely want this to be around for a few more generations. I know these are all 100% cotton quilting fabric.
Oh, okay.
But again, you never know with red. So I would definitely use all the tricks of Dawn detergent and vinegar and all the
stuff that we do.
Yeah. Stuff, and you know, test the corner first before I immerse the whole quilt, because I'd also wonder about the embroidery thread bleeding, that blue dye.
It's great. What size is that quilt?
I would say I'd have to measure it.
Okay, but it's quite big, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a large throw onto a twin size, probably 70 by 80.
That was smart too, because if she would have just put the blocks together and say stopped at the blue border, she would have had like a baby quilt or a much smaller quilt, and just adding to it's making it a much more usable quilt if you chose to use it, you know, and it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, I love it. I hope you enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun for me. It not only did it allow me to connect with another YouTube maker, but it also allowed me to connect with another quilter, which I always love, and also look at a really beautiful quilt with a wonderful history. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing, giving me that thumbs up, and even commenting below. If you want to see more things like this, please let me know that too, and I'll see what I can do. Have a wonderful week, and make sure you take some time to quilt. Bye.